Although we have Starlink here, when there's a bad storm, we often
Okay.
lose our internet.
It would be really great if you wouldn't mind maybe to just very briefly the idea of founding this Amazon Research Center for Ornamental Fishes.
So the idea of the research center was not my idea. It was one of the co-founders, Carlos Chupiando, is on call 24 hours a day. And so he wanted to find another avenue for his interest in fish. And we had been working together on my research for about 4 or 5 years. He was, helping me collect fish and arrange all the fishermen for me. At the time, some land became available, came to me and asked me if I'd ever thought about having a research center. Well, to tell you the truth, I never thought about ever having a research center because it's something, most people don't dream of that's what they're going to do. So I talked it over with Renee, my wife, to see, could we afford to buy the land? And the land wasn't that expensive, but still, I don't want to go into a big purchase without her saying so. And so we bought the land, and the land sat idle for a few years because, we really didn't have the money to put in the infrastructure. And so the impetus of us doing the infrastructure is here in Peru, there are homestead laws that allow someone, if they show a use of a piece of land, they then can claim that land for their own. And so we had someone build a house on part of our land, and they were able to take over that land. So at that point, we said we have to start building the research center, and that's really what drove us to actually start building the actual buildings of the research center.
Mm-hmm. And was already at that time clear what the goal of the research center will be?
The research center always set out to study the ecology, conservation, and sustainable breeding of ornamental fishes. We are the first research center in the entire world who is strictly devoted to studying ornamental fishes. We're not concerned with food fish, only ornamental fish. And in that, our main goal at the time was to try to teach the local fishermen how to sustainably breed ornamental fishes so they actually have a steady income throughout the year. And this is particularly important at a time like this. Here in Peru, we're in the rainy season, and many of these fishermen cannot go out and fish because they can't get into the flooded forest. It's not, there's no beaches for them to actually use their nets. And so if they had an income during this time of year, it would allow them to not have to undertake other potentially destructive industries like illegal logging or something of that sort. We're not telling them we don't want you to fish because that's their livelihood. So yes, fish, but you then can have an income on the times when you can't fish.
Additionally, by teaching the local fishers how to do their own aquaculture of the ornamental fish, it reduces the impact on fish that are wild caught and then exported for the aquarium trade. So over time, the demand for wild caught fish has declined because more fish are being captive bred, particularly from Asia. But there is still a large amount of fish who are exported from this area into the worldwide aquarium trade. It has been thought for many years that these small fish reproduced in such numbers that there was no impact to the large harvest that was going on for these fish. But we now know through research that that is not true. And some fish have become extinct and some are now red listed and are in danger of becoming extinct.
How many students from local fishermen do you have?
Well, we host a lot of students from the university, and Carlos, our resident director, who is one of the co-founders, has gone out to many of the fishers associations to try to get them to have a better product. We've gone in and taught, health management, better catching techniques. And this summer, we received a grant to go out into a village, fisherman village that is probably 20 hours away on boat, and teach them the aquaculture techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Linda, in addition to that, we decided in 2019 that we needed to build an aquarium so that we would have a center of conservation education. So in October of 2019, we broke ground on the Aquarium of the Amazon. And the aquarium is located on the research center land. Unfortunately, as you will know, COVID happened in 2020. So we lost a significant amount of time in the construction of the aquarium, but we did open in January 29th of 2024. Since January 29th of 2024 through December 31st of 2025, we have provided conservation education to almost 20,000 visitors to the aquarium. We do a program specifically targeted for children, and these are children who come from the schools, and we have done the program where it's a much more structured educational program. It involves activities with the children. It involves a tour of the aquarium, and it involves the children themselves being active in what is happening during that educational experience. And we've done close to 6,000 school children in the past 18 months.
Last time, when we actually finished this great storm in Peru, and you just had some power outages, and I was just thinking, what now with all the aquariums? How long can it last, and does it have any impact on your fish? So please tell me how do you mitigate such situation?
We have a big diesel generator that will come on at 9 seconds after the electricity goes off.
Super.
Yeah, so we've had another generator, but it just didn't have the capacity for the aquarium, so we actually had to invest in a much larger unit, and it's a really large unit.
It has its own house.
Yeah, it has its own house, the whole bit. And once the electricity goes off, it affects the entire compound. The problem is it takes about a minute for Starlink to reboot and come back on. And that's really the only difficulty per se. That's the only thing that's really negatively affected. The aquarium is perfectly fine because it only takes 9 seconds for the electricity to kick back on.
I see. That sounds really awesome. And then do you also have some kind of, and do you need it, cooling system also for the aquariums when we are already talking about this kind of technique?
Well, we have an air conditioning unit that we have blowing onto our big wall tank, which is 20 feet or 6 meters wide, and 2 meters high, 2 meters depth, because that tank will overheat.
Mm-hmm.
And so we actually installed an air conditioning unit that blows cold air onto the surface of the aquarium.
And we have 2 air conditioning units inside the aquarium proper that work all the time, and they're large enough that they cool down the ambient air, which then helps keep the water temperature cooler for the fish.
Right. So I was actually thinking that you had to cooperate probably with some kind of engineer or someone to really have all these situations under control, right? Overheating and also yeah, outages. Perfect. Thank you for the answers. And then now I have more generic, don't worry. So
Okay.
and also about the project, it was just yeah, my curiosity. So from all actually what you experienced, I also read that you had issues with leaking aquariums. You had to order new new equipment from China. So I was thinking, oh God, so this is really not easy one. So what was the biggest challenge actually you had with this project so far?
For me, I think it was the aquarium situation.
Mm.
I have built aquariums many times out of wood. In the States, didn't have any problems. Well, I forgot one thing. Here in the States, you get kiln dried wood. All the wood's been dried, and it's less than 20% humidity inside, moisture inside the wood. Well, in Peru, all the wood that we use probably was on the tree less than a week ago.
Mhm.
And so it dries naturally. And as it dries, the wood begins to warp. That's why we had all the leak problems, because as the wood would dry and warp, it would crack the fiberglass, leaks would form. And no matter what we did, we could not stop the leaks. It wasn't that it occurred all at once and it occurred right now. It was over 2 or 3 months. So we thought, okay, this is great. These tanks are holding water. We can start adding fish in a bit, and then one would start leaking.
It was a hard decision to make because we had to dismantle, I think it was 8 large tanks that had been built, salvage the glass so that we could reuse the glass fronts, and then contract with a company in China to build the acrylic tanks. And it was the best thing that we did. The other challenge that we found was Anthony has used, like he has said, he's made many tanks over the years here in the United States with a epoxy paint that's designed to be used in water environments. And the paint is just not the same in South America. And what we found over time is the paint bubbles in the water when it's exposed to water for a long time. So after we opened the aquarium, we systematically started replacing all of the wood-backed tanks. The smaller ones were fine. It was the larger ones that had a problem. And we've also started slowly removing all of the epoxy paint because it just doesn't work.
Once we ordered the tanks from China, from the manufacturer, we had problems getting them to Iquitos.
Our shipping agent, our receiving shipping agent, unfortunately turned out to be less than honorable, and he got into some financial difficulties. We had used him prior. We had used him before when we imported the acrylic wall for the acrylic for the large wall tank and the tunnel tank that you walk through. And so our acrylic tank sat in the warehouse and we're accruing debt. And he didn't have the money. We'd already paid him and he didn't have the money to get them out. So we ended up negotiating directly with the warehouse and reduced the fine, but we still had to pay an additional $10,000.
Wow.
Yeah, they sat in the warehouses for 45 days, and we were getting charged $500 a day for them just to sit there.
Timeline, because you were a good 18 months behind schedule due to everybody out, weren't you?
Yeah.
Between COVID and then these issues with the tanks, and finally, because the importer, you have to use a shipper, a person who imports for you out of Lima when you're bringing in from out of the country. And he kept telling us that the tanks were on their way, they were on the boat, and then he was lying, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And so finally, we had a contact in Lima who started working for us, and that's where we found out where the tanks were. And we negotiated directly with the warehouse. We explained everything that had happened, and they were very generous, in all honesty. They reduced the fine considerably, but we still had to pay an additional $10,000 to get the tanks out and to get them to Iquitos.
That sounds terrible, and it's just the beginning, right? So you suffered
Yeah.
already with the leaking aquariums, with all bureaucracy before, and then this one. So that's wow. That's
Wasn't a good beginning to the whole situation, that's for sure.
Linda, honestly, there were times Anthony and I sat down and looked at each other and said,
Well, cried for one.
cried,
yes,
but looked at each other
I
and
can
said,
understand. Yeah.
should we continue? Can we make this happen?
Mhm.
Tim has been wonderful support. But we actually evaluated and we stayed the course, and I'm glad we did, because now we can tell you, we just had our board meeting for 2025.
Mhm.
And I'm really proud of this, but we've had close to 20,000 visitors to the aquarium in the 23 months it's been open, or the 2 years it's been open. And every single person that gets conservation education. Now, our school children get a lot more, but every person that comes gets a tour, and at the end of the tour, we do conservation education. So we're really proud of that.